We can't count the number of people who've visited Sodor over the years, how many have come for its scenery, and how many have come to see its railway in action. We also can't count the number of times we've been asked, why do we have faces? On a previous occasion, I mentioned that was the most common question put to us engines before briefly describing the faceless and non-faceless categories that exist for vehicles. I had to be brief, otherwise I would have taken up the entire story with the particulars of that topic. So instead, I'll delve into the specifics today. My name is Edward, and this is a Sodor special. The year was 1856, and the Second Industrial Revolution was in full swing, thanks to the adoption of steam-powered machinery and transportation. The world had entered a new age of prosperity, and the people of Sodor wanted to share in it. A government initiative was formed to bring industry to the island, the first stage of which involved building it a railway. The workshops of Glasgow, Scotland were contracted to build the necessary engines and rolling stock for it. And it was in these grimy places that history was made.
Alright lads, this one's good for a firing. Light her up, Glenn. Will do.
Blimey, she lit up good and quick.
What was that? McCree, I swear to the Virgin Mary, if I find you're dozing on the job again. Hello there, I'm Clive. What's your name? Sweet mother of mercy! What is it, Hamish? It's alive! What is? The engine! It's blooming alive! Don't be daft! Come and see for yourself!
Clive's awakening caused quite a stir. The workers were absolutely dumbfounded by this, as was society in general. Every square inch of the boxy engine was examined, with his permission I might add, to determine how he had come to life. Nothing came of it, however. Nobody could explain it, not even the men who built him, who went on to do it 2 more times. This was the start of the age of the non-faceless vehicle. Over the following decades, as technology advanced, more began appearing on land, air, and sea. And not just in the United Kingdom either. As I once said, we have a number of advantages over our faceless cousins, but we also have some disadvantages too. Before I go any further, I think it's important I lay out a few things. To begin with, whenever a non-faceless vehicle is born, it's by way of a process called an awakening, so named because that's how it is. The first time we're turned on, the sensation is like waking up. The reason I mention this is because Clive's awakening was a momentous occasion for 2 major reasons. The first, it meant the start of a new kind of life. The second, the so-called myth of spontaneous combustion turned into a reality. After a non-faceless vehicle is fired up for the first time, the aptly named first firing to use the correct parlance, we're then able to ignite and extinguish whatever form of combustion it is we utilize to get ourselves moving. Best of all, it's instantaneous, so there's no fussing about and no waiting. The moment we're firing, we're off. Some people have also asked me what happens when we run out of fuel, if it's painful, or if that's the equivalent of us starving. The answer to both, thankfully, is no. When we run out of fuel, that simply means we can't move. On that note, many people are surprised when I tell them we're able to move on our own, which leads to the inevitable question of why we have crews at all. There are several reasons why. They provide us with regular maintenance and monitor our performance while we're working and keep us from exerting ourselves. and they are invaluable in the event of a breakdown. Should that ever happen, they can set about fixing it. As a side note, another advantage about non-faceless vehicles is we're able to tell our crews exactly where a fault lies, which saves them the time of locating it first. But more importantly, our crews are our friends and provide us with company while we're working. Of course, nothing is perfect, and we do have some disadvantages. For one, we've been called an impediment to progress. I once said that things are constantly changing, especially when it came to technology. No sooner something comes out, it is replaced by something new. Most of the time, this means the previous generation is discarded. For vehicles, this often means being scrapped. But since a non-faceless vehicle cannot be scrapped, as is the law, our owners, operators, and managers are essentially stuck with us. Though a company that has non-faceless vehicles also has a duty of care to keep them maintained, they're also under no obligation to effect any sort of repair that could price them out of business. This was how and why Burke and Blair were able to delay Toby's overhaul for so long, because it was too expensive at the time. Regrettably, this has led to the closure of more than a few businesses. There are choices available whenever such a thing occurs, but not all of them are good. Alright, so it's not always the fault of a non-faceless vehicle if their company goes under. Like everything else in life, there are multiple factors. To demonstrate this point, and to further elaborate on the rights available to a non-faceless vehicle, I'm going to turn to my pre-Sodor days, when I was a passenger engine for the Furness Railway. Together with my colleagues, Albert and Winston, we ran a fast, efficient operation. But despite our best efforts, our line would close down after a number of incidents, some more serious than others. On that day, our mournful manager gave us the 3 options put to non-faceless vehicles should their company ever close: relocation, retirement, or the final firing. Relocation simply means to be sold. I don't know whether I mentioned it or not, but a non-faceless vehicle must consent to such a transaction. This came about, believe it or not, thanks to the wording found in most anti-slavery laws. I chose to be sold and left for Sodor, while Albert and Winston went elsewhere. This is the most common option pursued, as it's seen as the best of the bunch. But what about retirement? Well, there are 2 additional choices with that. The first is to become a museum piece. The second is life on what's called a heritage site, where we can spend the rest of our days giving rides to tourists, holidaymakers, and enthusiasts. Now we come to the final firing. I don't know for how long it's been debated whether a person has the right to end their own life if they want, but for non-faceless vehicles, we do have that right, and it is absolute. The final firing is made possible by the introduction of a special chemical to our system. I've never been able to pronounce its scientific name, but it's commonly known as black water. Once this euthanizing agent is poured into us, we go into a deep sleep, one we don't wake up from. After that, our systems cannot be restarted. Then, and only then, can we be scrapped. Many of you might be wondering why on earth we would ever choose to die. I think the same could be said among humans. The reason depends on the situation. For instance, perhaps a vehicle has been so seriously damaged by an accident that no amount of repairs are possible. Maybe they're just too proud to retire. Or maybe it's the only option truly available to them. Whatever the reason, when a vehicle says they want to go, there's no debating it. An owner has to comply. Behind me is the symbol of the vehicle criminal justice system in Great Britain, Railgate Prison, a somewhat misleading name given that it houses any non-faceless vehicle or piece of rolling stock that has committed a crime. You may have heard the word shunted used throughout my stories up to this point. Of course, it does simply mean to shunt something, but when used in context, it also refers to when a non-faceless vehicle has been imprisoned. So, what's the maximum penalty we can receive for our crimes? 30 days. This might seem like a slap on the wrist, but when you take into account the societal impact, it can be pretty severe. Here comes Shane, so I'll use him to demonstrate what I mean. Let's say he did something wrong and was sent to Railgate. He runs the express between here and London, so if he were shunted, who would run this service? How would the commuters get to work? Let's try something closer to home. Let's say Kate were done in. Who would organise the trucks? As the work backed up, the mine's performance would surely suffer. This would likely jeopardise jobs and cause intense unrest in the local communities. I'm sure you get the point. A vehicle is made to provide a service, and it can't do that if it's confined to a cell for years at a time. So, does incarceration work for a non-faceless vehicle? Not always, but I suppose it works often enough for them to keep doing it. I mean, isn't that why humans just keep locking up their criminals? I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice that I haven't really explained how a non-faceless vehicle is created. That's simply because nobody knows. Even though we've been around for the better part of 2 centuries, very little research has been done on the matter. This is because we tend to live very long lifespans, and when a vehicle does finally expire and an examination is conducted on our remains, these quasi-autopsies tend to reveal nothing of value. There are several theories as to how we come to life, and I'll describe 3 of them for you. I'll begin with the chemical reaction theory. This one is somewhat self-explanatory, as it's thought that when a vehicle experiences its first firing, a peculiar chemical reaction occurs that triggers the birth of life. For a while, this was the generally accepted theory until the arrival of non-faceless rolling stock. Since they don't experience any kind of ignition or combustion, their presence added a further layer of mystery to the non-faceless topic and even questioned the validity of the first firing altogether. As an aside, I should point out that everything I've said about the rights afforded to non-faceless vehicles also applies to our coaches and trucks, including their right to die if they want. Next is the attentive theory. This one puts forward the idea that those vehicles that were built with an extra layer of care are the ones destined to become sentient. I've never really believed this one, as it's a bit flowery for my liking. Furthermore, it's been argued that care and attention goes into the development of all vehicles. So why wouldn't that mean they all come to life? Finally, we have the revenant theory, which suggests that all non-faceless vehicles are the mechanical reincarnations of the dearly departed. Though this might sound utterly ridiculous, there is a lot of evidence to support it. If we look back to Clive's awakening, you may have noticed something a little odd. He was less than 20 seconds old, and yet he was able to speak. Furthermore, he introduced himself by name. That's the way it's been for every non-faceless vehicle since. We wake up knowing how to speak, how to read, and what our names are. No non-faceless vehicle has ever been given their name. We've always known it. How would that be possible for what is essentially a newborn, unless they've already led a full life? However, This theory has never really been accepted, not just because it sounds so outlandish, but because, as time went on, vehicles began appearing with more unusual names. I don't know about you, but I've never met anyone named Splatter or Dodge. Well, I think that just about covers it for today. A lot of people have asked me over the years, am I ever worried about the future? If there'll ever come a time when vehicles like myself are no longer useful? Oddly enough, no, I'm not worried. After all, everything comes to an end, and I don't think it's anything to be frightened of. It's just the natural order. All the same, that's why I tell these stories, so we'll be remembered. And I do have a great many more to tell, but that will have to wait for another day.